Cameroon President Paul Biya has been re-elected for an 8th term that could keep him in office up until he's 100 years old. This is according to the official results announced by the Central African country's Constitutional Council. Biya, who is 92 years old, took office in 1982 and has held a tight grip on power ever since then, doing away with the presidential term limit in 2008 and winning re-election by comfortable margins. Let's bring in SABC News specialist correspondent Sophie Mokoena, who's standing by with the latest details. A very good afternoon to you, Ms. Sophie. We are looking at a very heavily disputed election here. In the midst of all of that, the world's oldest head of state has done it again.
Well, clearly those elections were quite controversial. We know that the opposition in that country is not happy, and they were questioning the processes, but including counting in particular. We saw the opposition leader indicating that according to their own information, he was leading. But we realized and saw later last week when there was announcements made by security cluster in terms of trying to clamp down on protest or dissenting voice in terms of what was coming out as results were trickling in, taking a grip of the situation. And we saw even yesterday. And therefore, clearly these elections are very controversial. I mean, you pointed out that he is currently 92 years old and he might be in office until he's 100 years. And therefore, that speaks to, it can't be that there are no competent people in that country who can run the country. I mean, so many years in office. And when you look at what's happening on the ground in Cameroon, poverty, the country is divided literally into two parts. He spends most of the time in Switzerland. In fact, he's running that country remotely. He's always in Europe for medical attention. And he has made Europe his second home. And therefore, who is actually running Cameroon? But you know, with the removal or people fighting colonialism, there was hope that Africa will do things right. But unfortunately, you still have countries such as Cameroon, where the issue of democracy is in question.
With his election victories having been marred by allegations of vote rigging, I do understand that there are fears of further protests which could break out with this victory.
Well, people did announce that they will protest, and I think we are going to see that because they had already started in different parts of Cameroon where people are not happy about the elections, and therefore we are likely going to see Cameroon. Cameroon is not so stable. As I pointed out, you have a portion of that country, particularly the area where the official language is English. There are tensions with those in the area that is dominantly French-speaking, and therefore we are continuously going to see instability in Cameroon.
Yeah. Let's cross over to the latest on the ground when it comes to Ivory Coast elections, because that also took place. What was the outcome? What do we know so far?
With the Ivory Coast, counting is continuing. The same story there. You have Ouattara, who is 83 years old, and people are saying he's taken the lead, and therefore he is going to stay in power for another long duration. And the question is, you don't have other people in Ivory Coast who could have weighed in or made themselves available. Unfortunately, in these countries, you find a situation where the leaders do change the constitution, even though there's a term limit, to ensure that they are able to stay in power, they continue to stay in power. And therefore, with information that the opposition, who is a billionaire in Ivory Coast, having accepted defeat, we are likely going to see Ouattara being announced as someone who has won the election and continuing, even though you can see that he has been in power. This will be a long term for him again. And also in the SADC region, there are talks about what's happening in Zimbabwe. You know that there's a recommendation that there should be an amendment to the constitution or changes to ensure that President Mnangagwa doesn't leave office in 2028. We don't know until when. And therefore, you see on the continent, we have two problems. Leaders who now want to stay in power for long. And those countries, when the time goes on, you see instability politically and security, and then you may see a coup. And therefore, you see this situation of people on the ground trying to change that misnomer in terms of people saying people want me back. But on the ground, it's a different story. And they would use the young people protest. We saw what happened in Mauritius. And therefore, the continent is becoming very, very unstable. And I think it will be the responsibility of the African Union to see what, as the continental body, it can do to ensure that Africa is back on track in terms of ensuring that there's peace and stability. Right now, this situation doesn't paint a shiny or rosy picture for the continent, but it looks like we are regressing as a continent.
Very well. Thank you very much. Bringing us up to speed there with the breaking news and some of the other stories making headlines across the continent is SABC News Specialist Correspondent Sophie Mokoena.